Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a new More Languages webinar presented in collaboration with Central State Languages for All. We're thrilled to have you with us today. So, as part of a series of 4 webinars we're presenting alongside Central States, we're honored to have Linda Havas, Chair of Central States, here with us to say a few words. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on this webinar. I know you're not here to see me, so I'm going to be very, very brief, which for those of you who don't know me, not always easy for me to do. Anyway, on behalf of Central States, we are thrilled to have you here, and we are so excited about this partnership with CLED. But just wanted to take a moment to remind you that registration for Central States in Kansas City is now open. We will be there from March 13th through the 15th, and early bird pricing is in effect for about another month. So please do check out our website, centralstatesconference.org, and please do join us there. And also please connect with us online. All of our links are there. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, we're all over the place. So please do join us in Kansas City. We're very excited about the conference this year, and we hope to see you there. So hand it back to you, Sabrina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. So, now I am delighted to welcome you to our session, Planning with a Purpose, Strategies for Backwards Design. And I am also very excited to introduce our speaker for today, Juanita Calvo. She earned a BA in Secondary Spanish Education from DePaul and an MA in Hispanic Studies from the UIC. Juanita has over 15 years of experience in education, from teaching Spanish at high school and college levels to serving as an administrator. Thank you very much, Juanita. Now it's yours.
Thank you, Sabrina, for those kind words, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I know that a part or one of the rules was to use the chat sparingly, but please feel free to introduce yourselves. Right, we're going to start with just let us know where you're joining us from, and if you can, what language or languages you teach and which levels, just so I can get a quick feel of where we're coming from for this session today. And I will also have some questions throughout, so feel free to throw your responses in the chat for that as well. I see we have, kind of all over the place, not limited to the Midwest. I see Northeast, New Jersey, Maryland, Illinois. I am in Illinois as well. My experiences in Chicago Public Schools and a few universities here in the Chicagoland area. So welcome wherever you are joining us from. So to start, I just want to go through some quick objectives, right, for this session. So at the end of the session, these are my hopes for you and for all of us today, right? So that we'll understand some key components of backwards design, identify and articulate in both senses of the word, right? So to explain, but also to bring together desired learning outcomes, design aligned assessments, develop engaging learning activities that align with goals and assessments, how to apply backwards design to your curriculum planning at whatever institution you may be joining us from, and finally, to be able to reflect on how backwards design enhances student outcomes, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want our students, right, to do better, learn more, get further. I also see a lot of different levels, so thank you for sharing that. Everything from post-secondary to high school and middle school and elementary. That's great. Thank you for joining us today. So this presentation is structured in several parts. So we'll just take a quick look at the theoretical background, right? What is backwards design? And then the 3 stages. So stage 1, identify and set goals. Stage 2, create assessments with a purpose. The 3rd stage is how to plan the learning experience with a purpose. And then we'll take a look at a sample unit to kind of bring everything together. And finally, we'll have that Q&A session at the end. So let's get started. What is backwards design? I'm sure that most of us are, somewhat familiar, if not very familiar, with backwards design. So I'm not going to get too much into it, but I did think that it's, worth mentioning sort of where this structure comes from, right, and what it's doing for us, right? So backwards design is a planning framework that helps us, um, right, organize our planning, right? Educators start by identifying the desired learning outcomes and then work backwards to design assessments, and then instruction, right? So this framework was developed by Wiggins and McTighe. They have a book called Understanding by Design. And so if you're interested in learning, more, reading more, that's a great resource for you, um, to look into. The three key stages, right, as I mentioned, are one, identify desired results, so determine the goals. Two, determine the acceptable evidence, so how to design assessments such as projects, tests, the presentation, or even a reflection. And then three, plan those learning experiences, which can be everything from activities, experiences in the classroom, outside of the classroom, discussions, right? Anything that will help students meet the goals for the unit and the expectations for that assessment, as well as, your overall goals. Sorry, before I move ahead, you can see down at the bottom, I have this line, right? So that it shows just the direction in which we're going. Okay, so why do we want to use backwards design in language teaching specifically, right? Because it helps us focus on real world proficiency goals, right? So I think most of us are in agreement that we're working towards, right, in helping students develop their proficiency and different skills, right? We want to align what we do with standards, be it the state standards or national standards that we get from ACTFL, or even the European framework, depending on, your institution. Backwards design also encourages meaningful assessments, right? It really helps us as educators focus on practical skills, and creating task-based or project-based types of assessments. It also helps us focus in on differentiation and scaffolding, how to be intentional about the activities that we're creating. And it ensures purposeful and coherent instruction, right? Because everything is aligned. All right, so let's get into it. So we will take a sort of deep dive into each one of the three stages to, see sort of how we can use some of this in our own classes. Right, so we're going to start here with a quick activity. So it's matching the key terms, very basic, right? Goal, objective, and framework are our terms, and you have three options. So take a quick look at what they are and just really quickly in the chat, type the responses. So, 1, 2, and 3. So you can just put the letters A, B, and C in the correct order. Okay, I see you're getting warmed up here. So a goal, right, is B, an aim or a purpose of instruction, often expressed in broad terms. An objective, you get a little bit more specifics, right? So that is what the learner will be able to do with the language as a result of instruction. That's the key point there. And then the third one, framework, is a document or, a set of rules or documents or resources that describes goals and standards to be met by language programs. And usually you'll get these from some sort of institution, organization, right, such as your state board. Something that informs what you will be doing. Okay, so here we see just some examples, right? And most of us work at an institution, especially if we're in the K-12 world, right, where we must follow some sort of framework, right? The national one and most common throughout the country is the ACTFL standards, or those 5 Cs that we're very familiar with, right? And so these standards tell us what students need to know and be able to do as they learn another language, right? So there's sort of the what of language education in those 5 goal areas, which are communication, cultures, connections, comparisons, and communities. ACTFL also has their performance descriptors, right? And these describe the learner's ability to engage in communication tasks, right? So things that they've been presented with in class. The proficiency guidelines, which we also have, and we see this cone thing here in the middle, right, which distinguishes the different levels. Those are useful for us, right, as teachers, um, because those kind of set overall goals, right, or the direction that we want our students to go in, right? But these proficiency guidelines, right, are probably the most useful in more testing scenarios, right? For our classes, what we really work with are more those performance descriptors and those 5 Cs, those standards, right? They're all related, and ACTFL will does a great job in their newest publication of describing how these are related. Um, right, and a lot of the states defer to ACTFL. I have some examples here, right? So Nebraska, Ohio, Wisconsin, for example, here in the Midwest region, which is where located, have additional, right, language standards. So it's always important, right, for us as educators to know exactly what we have to use, what we're expected to use, especially if we're in one of these states. But they're really good resources as well, right, because they really set that what of what we should be teaching for us. Right. So in stage one, now that we have identified our framework, we want to begin with the end in mind, right? So no matter what you're planning, you should define your destination. So what should your students be able to do? Um, and know by the end of the program, by the end of the course, by the end of the unit, by the end of the lesson, and by the end of the class, right? And this order, I think, is really useful. Depending on what your role is at your institution, you might be, planning out an entire program or the course. You might work on a course team to plan with your colleagues, or if you're working on some sort of curricular alignment. These are all questions that you might have. Even if you're a teacher working with a preset curriculum, you might still be responsible for your daily lesson plans, right? So keeping that same question in mind, right? So we want to begin with the end in mind, no matter where you start and what you're planning. So we want to, or for today's presentation, I want to contextualize a little bit the examples that we'll think about. And so if I want to, for example, right, plan a unit that aligns with Earth Day, an Earth Day initiative that's local in my community, or something that the school or my district is participating in, right? I know that as a teacher, I want to do this for my class. I'll ask myself, what else do I need to know or identify before I plan my unit? And so again, just add some thoughts into the chat, right? So if you have experience planning a course unit, or even if you don't, even if this is brand new to you, what are the sorts of things that you have to know or identify first? Good. Okay, so language level or the proficiency, what I want my students to master, the outcomes, okay, how the students are going to demonstrate mastery. Perfect. Okay, first thing is listing the goals and the project and assessment. Exactly, correct. What they know and what they need to know, the audience proficiency, student interest. That's a great consideration as well, right? So, especially if you right, are looking to create new and engaging projects or units, how you're going to assess them. Perfect. What sorts of background information, essential questions, all great responses. Thank you. I have some here. I think you've mentioned all of them, right? So the level, the proficiency level, or the level at what you're teaching, the objectives that you have for the unit, um, the standards that you are including, perhaps the duration of the unit. So how much time do you have for this within, the overall course map? And all of student interest is something that I didn't put in here, but a great thing to note and consider as you're planning this, right? So I might be super interested in Earth Day, but my students, right, probably need or might need a little bit more guidance or refining, breaking down that topic a little bit further or making a different sort of connection, and I can do that while I start planning. So here we have just some examples of the sustainable development goals, right? So in my example, we're talking about Earth Day. You can include any of these goals at any time. It doesn't have to be necessarily connected to Earth Day, right? But because Earth Day is Earth Day is one of the topics that I'm talking about today, and with the Central States theme, I thought this would be a great opportunity to show these goals, right? And you can create extensions or modify projects that you already have to really connect closer with these goals in your classroom to start making some of these connections. So in addition to, the other standards that you're working with, you can also have these as an additional reference point. All right, so for stage 2, we want to move on to that second step, right? We have identified our goals, and we want to create our assessments. And for this stage, I'm going to take a little bit more time because, so for me, in my perspective, I think that so all 3 stages are important, but it's my personal opinion and philosophy that the assessments really drive a lot of what happens in the classroom, right? And so before I move on, I just want to say this, right? That students will pick up on how you assess them and will, right? That because that's at the end of the day, that's what they value, that's what they care about is how they're being assessed, right? And so if we want to, right, help our students develop proficiency, then our assessments should also demonstrate that, right? They should have a be proficiency oriented, for example, right? Or be communicative or incorporate the 3 modes of communication. And so we'll take a little bit of time here in the assessments to really dive deeply, right? So I have this paragraph here, right, just describing, what role assessments play, right? So it says that assessments serve as the initial starting point when creating an educational program that follows the principle of backwards design. And again, it's going to provide that sort of anchor for the instructional activities and what you end up doing, I think, on a day-to-day basis. Right. So, why do we assess? So, I think all of us know the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment, right? And so I won't read the definitions or the descriptions for you, right? Except the first line. So it says formative assessment is an assessment for learning, and the summative assessment is an assessment of learning. So we really want to think about the both types of assessment when we use it, right? And be intentional about including both types of assessment in our planning. So it's not just that final assessment, right? That summative assessment. It's how we're going to build and use other types of assessment to help us and to help our students meet their overall goals. we have different types of assessments or different assessment tools that can serve both of those purposes, right? The formative and the summative. So we have achievement tests, which can also be focused on those skills, right? Sometimes called skills tests, right? Which help determine what students know. Performance tests, these are perhaps the most common for us, I think, in most classrooms, right? They help determine how well students perform given a task. And then we also have IPAs. So you may or may not use IPAs in your class, right? The IPA is an assessment tool that helps us sort of gauge the proficiency of a student. And so these aren't going to be directly tied necessarily to tasks that we do in the classroom. And so we're going to leave those out for today's conversation and really focus on leveraging the first two types of assessment for our course planning. Okay, so here's another quick chat activity. So what types of assessments do you already use in your classes? Let's get just a broad idea of the tools that you're currently using. Okay, so you do use IPAs. Great, great. Okay, project-based learning, performance, projects. Okay, formative, summative, independent activities, projects. Mhm. Good, good. Essential questions. Okay, so I see a lot of projects in IPAs, which is a great sign, right? That means that you're really working with building proficiency and helping students, right, develop that. So let's take a look at, right, a little more closely the assessments, right? So which assessments will demonstrate that students have met the unit objectives, right? That is the main question once you get to this stage of the planning process, right? An important consideration here, right, is to integrate the three modes of communication as well as other goal areas. So your assessment really should be comprehensive of the outcomes that you've outlined for your unit or for your course, right? So again, I might say unit here, but if you're planning an entire course, right, just know that these can also be for the different units, right? Your assessments can be program or course wide as well. Okay, so here are, and I just threw some assessment tools on here as examples. And I want to go through these. You may or may not use these. It seems like a lot of you are really using projects, and I really like projects as well. So I'm excited to talk about those with you today, right? But there are of course others, right? So these are, not comprehensive or exhaustive list, but just what I wanted to focus on today. So rubrics, the project-based assessments, self-assessments and reflections. I also really, really like these as a tool. Formative quizzes and polls, and then peer assessments. So rubrics. Um, right, this is a really good tool to use, right? Especially if you're working with those communicative or proficiency-oriented tasks or projects. They allow us to do several things, right? You can use rubrics, for example, to measure specific skills or knowledge areas. Or you can use a holistic rubric, which will allow you to give an overall assessment or evaluation of student work. Rubrics are a great tool, right? As I mentioned, I think in particular because you can align them very specifically with the proficiency levels, with all of the goal areas that you have for the unit, right? They also are a great tool because they help guide instruction. So once you have a rubric created, you know exactly, it's like the roadmap, right, for your lesson. You know exactly where you want your students to go, and you share these rubrics with students so students also know where they're expected to go, right? They also allow us to provide directed feedback to students, right, to help them reflect and grow and understand how they're doing in terms of development to meet these goals. Right. So here we have just a quick example of a holistic rubric. Right. You can see that it just has those three levels there: meets expectations, and then approaching or exceeds. And then here we have a project rubric, right? A rubric that is designed for a particular task or an assignment or a project, right? This type of rubric, the criteria is tailored to the specific learning objectives of the task, right? So whereas a holistic rubric, right, gives us that overall view, and can be perhaps, easier to check off. Um, this particular rubric, right, a project-based rubric or a task-specific rubric, allows us to give more focused feedback, right? So you can see here, it provides the context and the description of the project, right? This is for students at the novice level, and they have to create a script for a skit and then a performance for the school's theater club. And so it gives the context, and then the rubric also breaks down that project and the expectations for that project, including overall quality and completeness, communication and language, and uh, um, so project the project completion, the communication and language, and you can add additional areas as well, right? So fully customizable based on whatever objectives you may have, what you want to focus on, and use to provide feedback. Right. So the rubric goes very much hand in hand with the project or task-based assessment, right? And so projects are a great assessment tool, right? And they can be a little bit of a challenge, I think, to create, right? Because they require a lot of planning. But hopefully, this session will help you feel more empowered to take on that task. It is doable, right? So project or task-based assessments are a great tool because they really help us connect to the real world, right? They're based on real world tasks. It allows students to apply the things that they're learning, the language, in meaningful ways, right? You can connect to any issue, or to another discipline, right? If you wanted to work on a course team or grade level type project within your school, that's also a great way to do it. Service learning, for example, as well, right? And the criteria, right, can really help you focus on language use, topic engagement, and task if you wanted to, right? So if you really wanted to look at these things more carefully. Right, so here we have an example of a project, right? It has multiple steps. It is something that students can complete um, over a series of classes, or a week, based on things um, that they've been covering in the unit, right? So in this particular project, right, we have that students are going to prepare a survey about ecological awareness in their community and propose measures to improve the situation. So this is a group project that, right, again, is going to anchor the unit. You can already see there are multiple steps that students are going to need to know how to do several things. They're going to have to work collaboratively, excuse me, to put this together. And we even see, a potential model of a presentation of their findings. Okay. So another assessment tool that we can use is self-assessment and reflection, right? So this type of assessment, right, really can help us include that self-awareness or metacognition. For some states, they include this as a standard, right? So this has to be something that you should include in your class. And so this is a great way, assessment tool that helps you do that. Um, but even if it's not, right, and it's just a practice that you want to incorporate into your courses, right, self-assessments and reflections help increase ownership and increase or encourage independent learning, which is also a great a skill that we have to help our students develop, right? Especially as they get older and progress as learners. These self-assessments and reflection also, especially when they're connected to a project or the overall unit or a portfolio, help students, right, sort of reflect on, connect with the goals that you've set for them, right? So it increases engagement. It makes the activities that they're participating in more meaningful to them when you're asking them to think back about it. So here we have an example of what this type of assessment tool can look like. It doesn't have to be anything super complicated, right? This particular example is for an end of the unit. We have the can-do statements, right, over on the left. And, the first one says, I can recall a memory tied to an emotion. And then the student just has to check off, I can't do this. I can do some of it, but I need help. I can do it, but I could improve with practice, and I can do this really well. I'm good to go, right? So I really also like this particular example, because it says one of the options is I can't do it, but three are I can, right? But I can with varying degrees. Um, and that's helpful, right, for students, right, to say yes, I'm able to do this, but also, right, to think a little bit more deeply about how well they can do it, if there's room for improvement, etc. Right? And again, this type of thing, right, you can do at the end of the unit. You can also do it at the end of your um, the week. You could do it at the end of your class as an exit ticket, for example. Right. Here we have another example of reflection. So this particular one is tied to a project, right? So the other one was an overall unit. This one is tied to a project. It's the same one that we saw. So it's that skit, a script for a skit, and then a performance for the theater club. And the student just has to check, right? So they have this project, their assessment, their final project for the unit. And they have this checklist that allows for them to review all of the requirements. So this is not a rubric, but it can accompany a rubric, right? But this particular tool helps the student go through the different parts and self-assess, right? Whether they've completed the assignment, right? The task, if they've thought about the communication, their communication skills, and then specifically more those language resources. Have they thought, or considered whatever language resources were necessary or helpful for this particular task? And again, these types of reflections can be, this very structured, or you can also include them, as exit tickets. So that was something that I always like to do, right? Just have a check-in, and it could be something that they hand to you, or just that thumbs up, thumbs, this always works really well. Okay, I see a question. Are the self-assessment rubrics always written in the L1? I would say yes, right? Because we want for them to really think about what they're writing and not have that potential conflict, right? And so for the self-assessment, I would recommend using the L1. Okay, so the another example, right, are these formative quizzes. So, and they don't have to be quizzes, right? So you can call them anything. They can be a poll or they can just be a check-in, right? But these are critical the in the planning, right? But also for your eventual instructional practices, right? So these quizzes or formative quizzes, right, are helpful to check for ongoing understanding, but they're also critical in helping to build that foundational knowledge, right? So what are the bits and pieces that we want our students to know? And that's what we want to check in with them every so often throughout the class or throughout the unit. These are low stakes types of assessment tools, right? So you're not getting like a big, scary grade, or a grade at all, in some cases, right? Um, but even though they're low stakes, they really do support more complex learning objectives, right? So a great example of this, right, are these like, for example, a grammar quiz, right? It could be five questions again that you could use as an exit ticket. We've been looking at how to ask people to do something using the imperative, and I want to make sure that my students understand commands. Do they have it? Do they not have it? It's a quick check, right? Five little questions. I can get a really quick gauge and understanding of where they are. The same for vocab, for example, right? These are some key terms that my students need to know, and do they have it or do they not have it, right? So earlier in the session, I gave you those three terms with a quick little, matching activity. That's an example of a, formative assessment, a quick check-in. No one got a grade, right? But we all sort of had an opportunity to think about the responses and what those terms mean, um, and get a better understanding of the terms. Okay. As an instructor, as a teacher, right, that also tells me, do I need to go back and reteach something or expand, right? So a great tool for that as well. Peer assessment. So another tool that I love, and that's why I'm sharing it with you today, right? This helps us include collaborative skills, right, in those, if it's part of our desired outcomes. Again, skills that depending on what level you're teaching, you might want to actually focus on intentionally. Right. So this can also align with interpersonal skills. So if students are working, especially on these group projects, right, it helps students to think about, become aware of how they're interacting with their peers during the group, but also if they have to assess them, what that means, right? So they have to evaluate somebody else's work and give them feedback. So it helps to build that skill, as well as promote accountability and critical thinking to, with and to each other. It really encourages reflection on their own contributions as well, right? Because they know that with that accountability piece, right, that one of their peers is going to provide an assessment and feedback to them. I think it also helps to build that community right within your classroom as well, because the feedback doesn't always come from the teacher, right? They have other peers that they can connect with to get feedback in meaningful ways. They can think about, what the desired outcomes are on their own, but also with their classmates, and then practice effective communication. So if they have feedback for their peers, how are they going to communicate that to them, right? And what does that even mean? So we can start incorporating building these skills um, in this type of assessment as well, right? So here we have an example. It's a peer assessment. Um, this is connected to a project, but it doesn't have to be, right? And so this project is a secondhand market. So like a thrift store or an outside market that sells secondhand goods, like a swap meet or something like that, right? And they have to act out a market in class with their group. So it's an interpersonal speaking project that they have to complete. So in this peer assessment, right, this is very structured. The students have to look at, the instructions and the content, and then, did their peer do these things, as well as look at the communication, and the product presentation. Collaboration is another a component that you can add as well. Right. Okay. So coming back to right, thinking about assessments, right? These are the 6 keys to aligning assessment with outcomes, right? So we want to define clear and measurable outcomes. We want to choose the right assessment type. So we saw, 6 different examples. You mentioned several. There, really, the only one that we didn't look at was that IPA, but I see a lot of projects in your responses, right? So choose the right type of assessment. Develop rubrics that reflect the desired skills or those outcomes. 4 is you want to incorporate formative assessments for skill building, right? You can't be not intentional with those formative assessments, and make sure that you are including them, I would say, at least once per class. Use reflection to reinforce the learning goals, right? So I think that this reflection piece is often overlooked, but hopefully we've seen today why and how this can be a key type of assessment and exercise and practice in the classroom that can help students reach, right? So one, also identify their goals, have some ownership over some of those goals, and think critically and become active in working towards them. And then the 6th piece is provide feedback that focuses on outcomes, right? So we want to create assessments that align with our outcomes, but our feedback also has to reflect that, right? So if we are working on a project where students have to write out a script and perform it in class, then I'm going to focus on, that task and those objectives that I've had for that particular project, and less on, did they pronounce these things correctly? Did they conjugate the verb ser correctly? How many times did they mess up, right? So that type of feedback isn't going to help my student, right, meet the goal. And so really focusing on the outcomes, really focusing on the outcomes, and the the setting those using those rubrics or other tools to help you meet the goals. Are we going to share the rubric samples? Yes, we can. Mhm. And I'll send a link where you can find all of the rubric samples that we'll see today. Okay. All right, so moving on to stage 3. So we're going to plan our learning experiences also with a purpose, right? So here we're going to start with another activity. There's a lot of text on this slide. Don't get scared. All right, so what I want to hear from you in the chat is I want you to match this activity with the level that you think it corresponds to, right? So is it novice, is it intermediate, or is it advanced? Take a quick scan of the description and see what you think. Very specific, intermediate, mid. Okay, I see some novice, I see some advanced, a lot of mids. And so I would say that this is probably mid, right? And so they have to, for this particular activity, right, design a green city. It's a brochure. You can see that these examples, right, it's tied to the sustainable cities and communities. So you'll see the goal highlighted there. And they have to design a green city and create a brochure. The language focus is descriptive language, vocabulary for urban planning, conditional, So really, depending on where you are, I would say this is probably intermediate, mid, or high. And then the outcome, the students apply the language for describing places, benefits, solutions, right? So that is definitely at least intermediate um, for this particular activity. I think that you can flesh it out and perhaps view it more advanced if you wanted to. But let's take a look at another example. Same sustainable cities and communities goal, right? But it's a different task. Okay. So take a quick scan and tell me what you think this one is: novice, intermediate, or advanced. Looks like we have a consensus on this one, novice. Yeah, right. So it says small groups create a mini map of an eco-friendly city, labeling places like parks, recycling stations, bike paths, and gardens, right? So I think that labeling tells us a lot, right? It is very much a novice level task. The language focus is vocab for places within the city. I think we can all think of lessons that we currently teach or have taught previously where we, have students either create a map or identify different places on the map. So here's just a variation of that, right? That helps you connect to those sustainable development goals, right? With a very easy sort of twist, right? And the outcome for this particular example is it reinforces vocab for places and environmental actions, right? Encouraging students to think about what makes a city sustainable. Okay, example number 3, take a quick glance. This is a different goal. So goal 5, gender equality. So tell me if you think this is novice, intermediate, or advanced. Also consensus, advanced, advanced all the way. Absolutely, right? So we see in the language focus persuasive language, emotive expressions, digital media, um, right? Students create a social media campaign to promote gender equality and including different components to that social media campaign, right? The outcome is this project promotes awareness of gender issues while allowing students to explore creative language use. So creative language use is advanced territory, right? Audience engagement and persuasive strategies, right? So um, there we see, right, those clues that tell us it's advanced. All right, one more. Let's see what you think. All right, this is a different goal. It's responsible consumption and production, my eco-friendly choices, and it is a photo journal. So take a quick scan and last one, tell me what you think it is: novice, intermediate, or advanced. Okay, novice, 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 consensus. Very good, right? So we can see that the task is create a simple photo journal. So maybe I should have taken out the simple to make it a little bit more challenging. Create a simple photo journal documenting eco-friendly choices they make in their daily lives. Then it gives examples, right? They can take pictures of reusable bags, recycling, conserving water. The language focus is basic vocab, right? Related to everyday items. If you wanted to teach them like chunks of or phrases or basic sentences, you could do that. And the outcome, right? This task builds vocab around daily routines, right? While also encouraging students to think about sustainability, right? Hopefully, so these examples, I think, do a really good job of one, I think, showcasing how you can include, right, goals that are meaningful locally and globally in your classroom at any level, right? With a simple modification of lessons that you probably already do. And two, right, as we move into stage 3 of our backwards design, right, we have our project and we need to start thinking about right, more concretely, right, what um, our instructional activities are going to do, right? So what else do we need in order to build out our unit, right? So um, we'll okay, so for our Earth Day example, right, if we're thinking about our sustainable development goals, um, we can again start here, right? What are some possible assessment tasks or projects that I might use for this unit? We saw a whole bunch of examples that could be, very much part of this unit or of a smaller lesson, for example, right? Um, Depending on the different goal. So when you start to plan out or think about what your lessons or learning activities are going to look like, I have these or I identified these 6 keys to selecting or creating activities. Right. So the first one is you need to set clear goals and identify those skills and the knowledge needed, right? So in those 4 examples that we saw, we saw that, right? What the task was, what the the language resources were, and then the outcomes that we wanted, what we envisioned for this project and for our students to be able to do at the end of the unit or by completing this project. 3 is we want to design incremental or scaffolded activities to help us reach our goals. We want to, in our learning activities, embed opportunities for practice and feedback, um, and then make those real world connections as well. And then, of course, review and adjust based on the feedback or the formative assessment um, that we have. So here's just some examples, right, that I took from some of our materials. This particular example is reporteros, right? We start this lesson with a can-do statement, and this particular activity, right, students have to read, speak, and then write, right? So the overall goal, right, it says thinking about the world in the future. So we're still very much, right, thinking about the environment and sustainability, right? But for this particular activity, I'm focusing on making predictions about the future, right? So I'm contextualizing it. I'm setting my lesson forth with this can-do statement to start and organize the activities for the day. Right here we have a subsequent lesson, right? It says, I can discuss environmental problems and solutions. Students need to be able to do that, right? If we want them to create a poster, for example, or write a letter or, create any of these other tasks that we might set for them. And then here they also have an opportunity to speak and read, right? Incorporating the 3 modes of communication throughout. Um, and in this particular activity, right, we've selected a video that students will watch related to the Galapagos Islands. And then students get the opportunity to practice. So the last activity, I know it's a little bit blurry, but the last activity here, it says in groups, talk about, an environmental action that you all can take, right? So again, providing opportunities for students to practice before they have to complete that assessment on their own. There it is. Okay, and making those real world connections. So here we have, right, another can-do statement. I can understand a short article about the Ecuadorian region of Amazonia. This is helping them, again, connect the topic, the theme, to the real world, right? So that it's not just them working on this isolated or arbitrary project, that you give them also multiple opportunities to connect to the world outside of the classroom. So in your daily lessons, right? So here we have some things that I think you should include. Most of us, especially again, if you're in K-12, you have to write lesson plans that are very structured. And so you may already include these in, several ways. So you have to include or think about what are learners doing, right? What are you doing as the teacher, right? And in your activities for your daily lessons, you want to start by setting the stage. This, can be, a warm up or a getting started type of activity. You want to provide input that is meaningful, that provides language resources, but also provides relevant information about the content that you're working on. You want to also provide guided participation in your daily lessons. If possible, provide opportunities for extension. Sometimes we're super, super rushed and we have to, get through the lesson in 15 minutes and there aren't possibilities, right? To do within the class, but you might have, certain questions or activities that students can investigate on their own, right? So suggestions for looking for things online, for example, if it's not something that you can do in the classroom. And as I mentioned earlier, right, some sort of assessment. So if you're going to have, and you should, a can-do statement for every lesson that you teach, you should have a way to assess that, right? And it doesn't have to be a formal assessment every time, but you should get some sort of idea before the end of the class of if your students have met that goal, their can-do statement at the end of the class, right? And then also some sort of closure, right? It could be an exit ticket, but it can also be, I think, more specifically, some sort of wrap up, right? So that can be the exit ticket, or it could be something separate, but something that helps students sort of just tie it together. It could be, just a reflection on that can-do statement. It can be as simple as that. So I know that planning is a lot of work, right? Especially if you're working to build a whole new curriculum, right? And so I think it's important, right, that I encourage you to use your resources. You don't have to start from scratch or recreate the wheel, and there's no shame in that, right? So if you have time or a grant to develop your own program, right, then great. I think that we're all well equipped to do that. But it is very time consuming, right? And I've been a teacher in high school in Chicago public schools with 5 classes, 150 students. So I know what working in that type of environment does for time, right? And we want to be able to provide positive learning experiences, meaningful learning experiences, and productive learning experiences for our students. So as a teacher, right, use your resources. Use textbooks if you have them, right? Look for the state or district curriculum. If there is one, if there isn't, you can use those standards, right? That framework that is provided. Use your colleagues if you're not part of a course team. Connect with people at other districts or at other schools who are teaching the same level. Someone in your school who teaches a different language, right? Use that as well. And then don't be afraid to use AI tools, right? Magic School is an increasingly popular tool, for example, and I know that um, some districts pay for you to use that. There is like a free version, um, um, which is very limited, but just don't be afraid to use those tools that you have. All right, so I see we have a few more minutes before the end of the session. And so I just want to sort of bring everything together, take a look at a unit in action, right? So we have, right, thinking about backwards design and the different stages, right? We have um, different components, right? So the first one, right, we have our objectives or our learning outcomes for the unit that are connected to our overall course map. We have a final project, which really anchors, right, the unit and as well as those outcomes. Then we identify what language resources do my students need, right? Vocabulary, grammar structures, chunks, and then also what sorts of content information do they need? So identifying those, right, so you can get started. Here we have another example of a unit. This is not environment related. I wanted to give you something a little bit more basic, right? This is level 1, right? We have that project that anchors the unit, which is a variation of a family tree. It's just my circle of people who are influential or meaningful in my life. And that is, the project that anchors the unit. And we can see that, right, there are students see the vocabulary themes, the language structures, right, from the beginning. That's something that has to be set from that initial stage. And then all of the instructional activities in between really help to students develop those skills, right, by acquiring or practicing vocabulary, by providing opportunities for input, right, to receive, again, vocab and those grammar structures, as well as providing a model. So here we have an example in Spanish. But remember, I said use your resources, especially tap into your colleagues, right? You could, right? This project isn't Spanish specific. You could do this in German, right? So if you could do it in French, same project, everything is going to be very similar, right? So all of those resources, even perhaps your vocab list might be very, very similar. And so really work together. I think that'll help you, feel supported, but also come up with resources that can help build your program in your school, in your district, right? To have that curriculum alignment by sharing some of these projects whenever possible, right? Um, so some considerations for planning, right? So if you use Google or any other resource, you can find unit map templates. These are a really great way to organize, your information and start building out these units or your courses. Share, right, with your colleagues. There are a lot of resources online. Some are great, others not so. There's a lot in between. So also, keep that in mind if when you're working with things that you find online. In a lot of cases, adapting is faster, right? So adapt when possible. Creating units does take more time, but the benefit of that is that you can customize your units, your projects based on your own students, right? So something that a lot of you mentioned at the beginning was, student interest. What is interesting to my students, to my community, to my district, etc., right? So that you can do that if you create your own, right? So I did want to provide some additional resources for planning using backward design. So again, the book Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTighe. If you wanted to look for that, Actful has a lot of resources, the proficiency guidelines, your can-do statements, and this article, The Keys to Planning for Learning, is great for backward design in the language classroom specifically. Carla at the University of Minnesota, I know that they've archived a lot of their original project, but you can still find it. They have a create a unit module, which is really helpful because it takes you step by step. And then always your state board of education or your curriculum and instruction admin if you have those at your district. All right, so thank you. And we're ready for some questions. Sabrina, I'll let you take over.
Of course. Thank you, Juanita. Again, yes, thank you for sharing your insights and your expertise with us. So we'll start with the Q&A session in just a moment. We still have time, so please, if anyone has any additional questions, you still have time to place them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I'll just take a second in the meantime, you can please share any feedback with us through the link in the chat. I'm going to put that right here. There you go. And also remember that you can request a free sample of any of the materials that Juanita presented or explore other resources from Clever Languages. We put the link in the chat before and we're going to put it right now in just a second. So, let's see. So far we have one question. Remember, you still can make additional ones. So, Juanita, the question we have is what textbook, sorry, for Spanish do you use?
So I don't currently teach, but the last time that I taught, I used Aula Internacional, and that was at the college level for Spanish, and I used that for like the basic, so novice and intermediate. That is a task-based program, and so um, so this is a very personal sort of story and response. I think that coming to this book, Aula Internacional, when I was at the university, um, it helped me. So I knew about backwards design previously, right? But having the book as a resource really helped me put backwards design into action in my classes, right? It gave me that solid foundation that I needed, even though I was an experienced teacher, had been teaching for over 10 years at that point. Um, right. But I found that the structure of that book, right, having that task, that final task, as well as those learning outcomes, language resources organized in that way, help me better understand the process of planning, but also how to organize the activities in my day-to-day planning. And so that's one of the books that I started with and really helped me better understand backwards design, but also um, language teaching in a lot of ways.
Perfect, thank you. We're having a few more questions in the chat. The first one we have is that text project-based focused?
Hi, Liliana. I know we've been talking via email a little bit, and so instead of project-based, I would say that it's task-based. So, in the definition of what a task-based approach is, it's much closer to that than project-based. And we can follow up via email, and I can send you some samples so you can take a look at how that book is structured. But I would say again, it's more task-based than project-based, which is similar but not quite the same depending on how technical you want to get.
Perfect. Then the next question we have is if you have a unit map template that you suggest using. So, for example, one that is blank that this person can fill in to design their own.
Yes, absolutely. And Sabrina, we can include that in the resources that we send. Yep, yep. So I do have one that I use that is a unit planner as well as a template for lesson plans that helps you connect, right? So the learning goals that you set in your unit planner, how you can transfer those to your everyday lessons. So I can absolutely share that with everyone.
Fantastic. And let's see. We're also there's also one question. Let's see if we can help us out with that. If not, I think we can answer this from another way. But
Okay.
if you have any learning outcomes available for German language series, in this case, it's Klasse. So let's see what you say. Otherwise, we can suggest an email. What do you think, Juanita?
Yeah, I would say definitely follow up. We do have learning outcomes for German materials at different levels. I see that Catherine is in the chat as well, and so maybe she can speak to that in the chat. But for sure, reach out and we can send you some examples of what we have available to help you with any program or program or course mapping.
Perfect. Yes, I also put marketing email here. So if also
Okay.
anyone has any specific questions on the materials that maybe we cannot answer now, you can send us an email and we will move them forward to you, Juanita, or we
Okay.
will try to help out as well.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Let's see. So apparently that was the last question. Perhaps we can move forward to a few informations before we wrap up the webinar, unless we have, wait a second. Okay, sorry, no, we have a new question, which is if you could give an example of a formative assessment you have that connects with the summative assessment.
Formative that connects with the summative. Um, yeah, so I don't know if I have any here, but right, I think that the key to that, and I can, include that in the examples as well, right? But the key to that, right, is that you're going to start with your summative assessment first, right? That's really what's going to anchor your your unit plan. And so once you start thinking about, what are your progress indicators, right? What are those individual learning outcomes? Then you should write a formative assessment that matches that, right? So I can give you a set of examples using um, using one of the assessments that we saw, the formative assessments that we saw today, right? But again, that the summative assessments that we saw today. But again, right, those formative assessments can be as easy as a vocab quiz, or it can be a reflection on the can-do statements, right? So your progress indicators might be in the format, right, of a can-do statement. And so all of your can do statements will connect to your summative assessment, right? And so if you use those can do statements as, you know, at the beginning of your class, when you introduced your lesson, right? I remember I did this when I taught high school, also when I taught at the university level, I always started with, the goal for today is this, right? At the high school, we had to say, I can. The entire school had to do that, right? And so that was really easy for me because I was very much in line with what I wanted to do anyway, right? Yo puedo, blah blah blah. And so that's how I started my class every day, right? To really focus the student on what we're working on. And so to close, right, that closure, you can have that be a reflection of that can do statement. And again, that can do statement is connected, right, to your overall goal. And so there's always that reference back. But I'm happy to include concrete examples when in the materials that we send as follow up.
Right? So, yes, let's see if we have any additional question. Catherine is helping us there in the chat with some of them. So, yes, perhaps we can take like small pause. We can, in the meantime, to see if any other questions come pop up. So we can just continue with you, Juanita, that I think you have a few informations to mention.
Yes. All right. So I see another question that I want to answer before it disappears,
Oh,
if that's
yes,
okay,
yes.
Sabrina. So the examples that you will share are those from books you promote or the independent from the books. And so the examples that I have today come from both places, right? So some of them are from our materials. And so those the tasks that I had you identify, was it novice, intermediate, or advanced? Those are not from the book, right? So those are ones that we created, and those are all tied to the Sustainable Development Goals, right? So you get, I think, a mix of both, um, and so I'll send both as well. Okay. All right, so some announcements. So we have some additional free upcoming webinars. So if you enjoyed this one or you found it helpful, please consider joining these next ones. Also in partnership with Central States, Catherine, who is very much active in the chat today, will lead a session in December on integrating ESD themes into the world language curriculum. So I think it's a great follow up to this session. And then my colleague Tyler will, in February, lead a session on sustainability across cultures, so exploring global perspectives through language. And then Diego Ojeda, who does a lot of great work. And if you've seen other webinars that we host, you see that he holds a lot of these for us. So another one that he will hold later in the spring is bringing global issues into language learning, connecting with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. To get any information or register for these webinars, you can scan the QR code that is there. You can also go to our website to find more information. I also want to let you know that we have this amazing grant opportunity. It also goes very well in line with the things that we talked about today. So many of you mentioned that you're working with project-based assessments. So if you have a project, right, or a series of projects that you're working on, consider applying for this grant. It's for project-based learning in World Language Education. It's up to $500 that CLET World Languages is sponsoring for this grant within the Central States region. So you do have to be in one of those states to participate. If you want more information, there's another QR code here, and you can find more information on our website for that as well.
Perfect, Juanita. Thank you. I'm going to make a quick stop before I
Oh,
talk to you all about the KWL learning community. Don't worry about it. Because there's a small question that I wouldn't like it to be lost, which is for
okay.
novice learners, would you write the can-do statements in both English and Spanish?
I would write them in Spanish only, right? So, because for one, I think main reason is that they start to recognize the structure of it, right? And so at the novice level, right, the active verb, right, that they're going to see in the can do statement is probably going to be the same or very similar, right? So I can speak, I can understand, I can, you know, share, explain, probably not explain at the novice level, right? So um, for them to recognize those verbs is not a bad thing, right? You can, I think, at the beginning, explain what they mean, but eventually they'll also just recognize those verbs, right? And it's not like a super complex structure. If you wanted to translate them, I think that's also, a good idea, especially at the beginning, for them to, really understand what's going on. But I think that's totally up to you and your style for your classroom. Right. Earlier during the session, someone asked if those self-assessments were always in English, and I said yes. Right. And I think um, that they can also, if you're thinking about that as a reflection type exercise, it's good to have them in English so that they can focus really on thinking about what they're doing. They recognize the can do statements if you've been seeing them in class every day in Spanish? Yes. And so they might be able to identify them in Spanish, right? But what I want them to be able to do as well, right, is not only tell me if they meet them or not, but perhaps, describe to me, give me additional feedback. I selected, yes, I can at this level because blah, blah, blah. Right. And so, in order to, make my students feel the most comfortable with that self reflection process, I would do it in English. But, again, is it totally wrong if you have them do it in Spanish? Maybe not, especially as get more advanced.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Juanita. Again, thank you for the perspective and for all the information you gave to us. This was really, really helpful. And thank you all for your engagement. Before we finish, just two final announcements. These ones come from me. So we wanted to invite you to check out the KWR Learning Community. So first of all, we have, as you can see, these free webinars. We have the next from this series alongside many others, and we also have training sessions. Besides this, we also have complimentary onboarding in case you already adopted one of our materials. That includes, we have platform training and also initial content implementation. We're also present usually in many conferences and events. So if you're going to one and we're there, we would love to meet you and greet you face to face. And besides this, we also have some paid continuing professional development, which we highly recommend. And you can see all these in our website. You just have to go to cletwl.com-pd to learn more about them. And also, we're very happy to announce that we will be in ATFL 2024. You can see us at booth 1113, so you can explore some of our latest materials. We have a few news over there, so we will love to share them with you. And I also want to mention that we're gonna present a new component with AI for our textbooks. So we're gonna share a form with you right now. So in case you're coming, you can let us know and we can send you all the info about that. And for those who asked about the certificate of attendance, we just shared the link again. Remember that you will receive the recording and the PowerPoint presentation in more or less a week, and the certificate of attendance as well. So don't worry if you lost anything. You can also request a free sample for any of the materials. And I think that's it. Again, thank you very much to all of you for your attendance, for your enthusiasm, and for all your help. And I hope you'll have a nice evening.